Well, you can add a few more names to your spreadsheet, Miles, because last week the CCP purged a new group of defense officials, most notably Li Shangfu, the current, now former, defense minister. According to Reuters, the CCP claims that Li was receiving huge sums of money in bribes, as well as bribing others, and a CCP investigation found he did not fulfill political responsibilities. So, Miles, we covered the history behind moves like this last week, and we won't cover that same ground again. But what's your read here on this latest military reshuffling? What does this all mean?
Well, Xi Jinping has many nicknames, monikers. He's known as, officially, of course, is the General Secretary of the Communist Party. He's also known as the Chairman of everything, because virtually every title the PRC has and is held by him. He's also known as Accelerator-in-Chief. This is mostly from the dissident group who believe that he's done so many bad things for the regime. The regime is going to sort of speed up to its demise. But now, Xi Jinping should have another moniker. That is, he's a purger-in-chief. He has purged nice. So many officials in the name of corruption. And I will explain to you why corruption is just a ruse. It's basically a non-issue. It's a political purge. We said last week, last Tuesday, when our previous episode came out, and it was mentioned that Li Shangfu and his predecessor, General Wei Fenghe, would be purged. And we understand that was the case. But then Thursday, the PRC make a huge announcement, make it official, and with specific charges against the latest two defense ministers, Generals Wei Fenghe and Li Shangfu. And those charges were very, very interesting. Now, what's so important thing about this purchase is that it's actually timing. So it has something to do with the procedure of how the CCP goes about to conduct its business.
Okay.
Procedurally, usually, you have this third plenum of each Communist Party. This is now the 20th Party Congress. So third plenum is very important because it makes a major personnel decision as well as a major economic policies. Normally, third plenum would take place in the fall. And then in the spring, the rubber stamp, the National People's Congress would put a stamp of approval on it. So that normally takes place in March. But Xi Jinping lives in paranoia constantly. But before the third plenum of the 20th Party Congress, which would convene last fall, Xi Jinping basically purged his defense minister, Li Shangfu, and his foreign minister, Qin Gang, and he made his general before Li, General Wei, disappeared. So he was telling the party that the heck with the party plenum, and I am the king, and I want to do whatever I want to do. So there was no need for the third plenum. So there was no third plenum in the fall last year, which is kind of odd, which poses an embarrassing problem for the upcoming National People's Congress that would take place in spring, in March, because it had nothing to put its rubber stamp on, because the party did not have the third plenum. Nothing was official. So this year's NPC that took place in March was kind of a super weird. There was no pre-event promo, and there was no hoopla, and the entire meeting was cut short by half. Normally it's 2 weeks, but then it barely lasts for a week. No major announcements whatsoever. So now Xi Jinping, in June 2024, faces a lot of backlash from within. So he had to have a settlement on all his brutal internal purges since last year. Therefore, you have the third plenum scheduled for July 15th until 18th of July, which is basically in 2 weeks. But before that happened in 2 weeks, Xi Jinping wanted to upstage the procedure again, and the party make a last Thursday announcement of the purges of Li and Wei and his two recent defense ministers. So this is basically, though, Xi Jinping is acting like a Mao, completely disregard of the party, its own procedure.
So what is he trying to signal to the party and the rest of the military with this move amongst the regular procedure?
That means his supremacy is unchallenged. and that nobody could even harbor any iota of doubt about his awesomeness, about his omnipotence. This is a guy whose ego is totally inflated. Every day he makes speeches pointing the directions where the world should go. By the way, he did not just purge Lee and Wei. In last Thursday's announcement were also 9 other senior PLA leaders, very senior, including Deputy Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, 2 Deputy Commanders of the PLA Armament Department, Commander of the PLA Rocket Force Armament Department, and the People's Liberation Army's Air Force Chief, General Ding Laihang, 2 PLA Rocket Force Commanders, the latest ones, Li Yuchao and the previous one, Zhou Yalin, and also Deputy Commander of the Southern Theater and the Commander of the Southern Fleet. So all those very senior PLA officers were announced as being purged, ostentatiously for corruption. Obviously, this is not the case. Now, most international reporting has been wrong because it's not really about corruption.
Right.
If you read the indictments against Li and Wei, the number one crime against these 2 defense ministers is in violation of political discipline. Political discipline. Right. That means that he doesn't follow Xi Jinping's order, right?
Yeah.
Number 2 crime against these 2 guys was resisting the party's supremacy in military work and the comprehensive command of the party over the military. End of quote. Now, that's nothing to do with corruption.
Right.
That's basically, this is a political purge. And then followed by these people took a lot of bribes. Of course, they will say that. Every single person purged by Xi Jinping is done in the name of corruption. But specifically how much this guy took, in what form, there are no details. And then most importantly, there's no defense for these guys. They're disappeared. So I think ultimately this new round of purge really points to the profound dilemma and unsolvable problem of the CCP. That is, the complete impossibility of being both read and expert. In other words, read and expert was the Maoist era slogan. That is, every soldier in the Chinese People's Liberation Army must be both read, meaning communist, loyal to the party, loyal to the communist cause, and the expert, that is, you're being professional. You know how to handle the weapon. You know how to do military training. You know how to fight a war and win. If you are so much into the communist ideology, you cannot be expert. And I think that's why, if you look at the guys who Xi Jinping has purged, most of them are in a very professional field. Most of the disciplines in the rocket force, right? They require a lot of professional know-how. And Xi Jinping has promoted a lot of political commissars, assuming loyal to him with 100% guarantee. And then they get rid of all these guys who are professionally qualified. And I think that this really is about that. It's about the complete impossibility of being both read and expert.
Can I ask a practical question here? How does this constant purging and what has to be constant fear within the actual ranks of being purged, if you aren't read and an expert, how does that practically impact military readiness and the strength of the PLA?
Well, there's a lot of internal reports, obviously, but if you look at the episode that we talked about last week, Xi Jinping took the entire CMC political work team to Yan'an to stress the importance of ideological correctness. That means that there are some people who he considers as ideologically incorrect. Mm-hmm. That also means a lot of people who are very, very unhappy. Each one of the senior officers they purged, there are also been a lot of people, hundreds of officers they promoted down the chain. And those guys were also being affected. At least their military promotion path is done. they cannot really be promoted any further, if not being demoted. So this is why the impact on the morale will be very tremendous.
It's got to be, yeah. All right, moving on. This next one, I got to be honest, is a doozy, and I'm going to need your help here because last Friday, Xi Jinping gave a speech commemorating 70 years of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. His speech was literally titled, Carrying Forward the 5 Principles of Peaceful Coexistence and Jointly Building a Community with a Shared Future for Mankind. I mean, this was actually hard to read seriously, so let's just go back to school here, Miles. Start by explaining to us what the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence are, one by one. The first is mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and that's real cheap.
Yeah, well, 5 principles of peaceful coexistence is actually kind of a joke. It's a height of Chinese Communist Party's hypocrisy, because this is probably the supreme example of China's united front work. It assumes that the other people are not for peaceful coexistence. Only China, Chinese Communist Party, is the angel of peace, which really is laughable. Now, if you this has been China's sort of a shibboleth since the 1950s. Every time China shows aggressiveness, they say, you know what, we're not the one who's the aggressor, and let's just be peaceful. Let's just make sure that we're in coexistence. The first one is mutual respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty. This is number 1 of China's so-called peaceful coexistence, the 5 principles. What really China means that please respect my disrespect for other countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty. My gosh, look, think about it. No country in the world has a more territorial demands for others' land than China does. As of now, China has ongoing territorial disputes with the following countries: India, Bhutan, Vietnam, Myanmar, Taiwan, Japan. And if you add the South China Sea, that would also include the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. Those are ongoing disputes that China wants other people's land from. Currently dormant, but potentially resurgent disputes China has with these following countries: Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Laos, Mongolia, Nepal, North Korea, Pakistan, and Tajikistan. Do you know how many land neighbors China has? There are 14 land neighbors. Do you know how many I have just listed? 14. So you added Japan, Taiwan, Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. That would include virtually all of China's maritime neighbors. Mm-hmm. So the conclusion is that China has territorial and maritime disputes with virtually every one of its neighbors, land and maritime. So this whole issue about respect for other countries' territorial integrity and sovereignty by the Chinese Communist Party is really a joke, a big joke. So we have to understand, when we talk about stopping China from invading Taiwan, we're not just talking about Taiwan. We're talking about stopping a long chain of aggression by China against virtually all of its neighbors. That's not disrespect of China. That's respect for world peace and prosperity.
Yeah, each one of these can be laughable in their own right. Number 2 is mutual non-aggression.
Again, this is also a very, very strange. Mutual non-aggression. China has fought war and taken military actions against more of its neighbors than any other major countries in modern history. Wars against India since 1950s, for example. Wars with the Soviet Union in 1969. Wholesale invasion of Vietnam in 1979. The intermittent wars and shelling of millions of artillery pieces into Vietnam in the entire 1980s. Let alone China's role in facilitating global conflicts in Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. So mutual non-aggression means when China tries to invade others, you know what, it's none of our business. Stop, just make a big fuss over my aggression.
I like how you're turning the tables on all of these. Number 3, mutual non-interference in each other's internal affairs.
This is also a joke. The most expensive PRC government programs, other than domestic repression and military spending, are dedicated to operations of interference in other countries' internal affairs. It's called the United Front work. The first of Mao Zedong's 3 magic weapons for the CCP is United Front work. The second one is armed struggle. The third one is party construction. CCP's interference with the U.S. internal affairs, for example, would include the following. Number 1, big money to cultivate proxies among U.S. policy, business, and education elites, to lobby and influence U.S. sovereign and foreign policies toward China in particular. Number 2, setting up friendship organizations with the U.S. subnational entities, including state legislature, sister cities, university exchanges, etc., etc. Number 3, setting up secret police stations in New York and other places, intimidation squads among Chinese diaspora communities, all the Chinatowns, and university campuses, or national labs, where hundreds of Chinese students and scholars concentrate. So lastly, China has conducted massive electronic and human intelligence penetration into Western countries, particularly in the United States.
Yep.
Those were interference in others' internal affairs. So China said this without even blink of the eye. It's just really, really shameful.
All right, number 4 is equality and cooperation for mutual benefit.
You ask China's neighbors. China views most of its neighbors as the little countries, 小国. Literally, they're very condescending. One reason why the ferocity expressed by China toward countries like Vietnam and the Philippines, because China would never expect little countries like the Philippines and Vietnam to openly oppose to China's demands, territorial and maritime. And that's why their respect for those so-called little countries were virtually non-existent. They also talk about mutual benefits. When China constantly talk about the win-win to the Americans, that normally means that China wins twice and the U.S. loses twice. That's basically, it's not mutual benefits. It's a one-way street.
And to close up, the 5th principle of peaceful coexistence is peaceful coexistence.
Well, this is the ultimate one. The irony is this. Peaceful coexistence was first uttered by the Soviet leader Khrushchev in the context of the United States and the Soviet Union Cold War contest. China was absolutely against it. This is one of the major crimes of Khrushchev, of being a Marxist-Leninist revisionist, over which China and Soviet Union would eventually split. The phrase peaceful coexistence domestically within the Chinese Communist Party's rank and file, it sounds very insidious. It shows China's ideological intransigency. That phrase, peaceful coexistence, marks the betrayal of Marxism-Leninism, because you cannot really coexist with a capitalist country, with the United States, an imperialist. So peaceful coexistence is aimed for different audience here. That is mostly Westerners who have naively thought that the Chinese communist model of governance would be benign. It would pose no threat to Western democracy, and both can win, East and West. That's why there's a peaceful coexistence. This is really, really interesting because there's a huge audience within the Western democracy. I mean, I used to work at the Trump administration, and there are some very high senior officials within the Trump administration, for God's sake, and to believe that Chinese Communist Party poses no threat to the United States, that they're not really communist. This is nonsense. The CCP wants to dominate and win, because if you read Xi Jinping's speeches, if you read Mao's works, every Communist Party leader believes that democracy and the communist world could never coexist, because it is, as Xi Jinping often said, and Mao also said this many, many times, it's a you die, I live, zero-sum game. 你死我活的斗争. You die, I live struggle. It's an epic struggle. In other words, the regime in Beijing will have to change the democratic regime of the world, or the regime in Beijing be changed. That's how they view the world. So unfortunately, we still have some silly people in Washington today endlessly debating whether regime change in China should be an option. It's not really useful. So we have to look at the peaceful coexistence from this perspective. Number one, it has its domestic audience. Number two, it has a global audience. This is just a beguiling United Front work.
Is it just a translation thing, or is it just me that one of the principles of peaceful coexistence is peaceful coexistence? That doesn't make sense. You know what I'm saying? That's like saying the best way to be good at basketball is to be good at basketball. Like, it's, you know what I mean? It's self-fulfilling.
It's self-fulfilling. I mean, there's a 5 principle of peaceful coexistence, mostly for China to work on the non-Western countries,
Sure.
the newly independent countries in particular. It was first used in 1955 on a massive scale in the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, because China wants to grab the leadership role of the non-alignment movement. And that really didn't work out because India took the leadership, and that's one of the reasons why China and India didn't get along. But ultimately, it's not going to work because actions speak louder than words. Here, when Xi Jinping convened this 70th anniversary of these 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, the world barely pays any attention to it at all. But it sounds pretty good to a lot of people who are not in the first world, the second world.
All right, and finally, to wrap us up, the State Department released last Wednesday its annual report on international religious freedom, and to no surprise, China was deemed rightly as oppressive. The report covers the well-documented persecution of Muslim Uyghurs, which is ongoing, and notes that, quote, the Chinese government restricts the activities and freedom of religious followers it believes threatens the state or Chinese Communist Party interests. But it's not just the Uyghurs. The report cites another group, the Church of the Almighty God, which alone had over 12,000 of its members arrested in 2023. CCP has officially labeled that group a cult. But the evidence doesn't lie, Miles. Could you expand on this report's findings here and help illustrate what some of this religious oppression looks like?
For several decades, many people in the West believe that somehow China and the United States could coexist economically, also through trade. And to a certain degree, they're right. But fundamentally, that's also a dead-end alley, because the engagement with China is really not just about economics, not about trade. It's really about the ideology. It's about political system. It's about the models of governance. One of the most important hallmark of that kind of true nature of the bilateral relationship is religious freedom. Religious freedom tells the difference between the United States and China in many, many ways. Number one, basically, is freedom of speech, right? Is freedom of worship. Number two is really about how the Chinese government governs the nation through total ideological control. Many of the U.S.-China economic engagement has been affected by this. For example, China's massive detention and massive torture of Uyghurs in Tibet and the Xinjiang province, that has affected U.S. trade because there are so many sanctions right now in effect about goods and labor used in Xinjiang. And also, you have many of China's leading companies of global significance, the makers of the world's largest surveillance systems, cameras, ultra-red monitoring devices. They were used by the Chinese government to monitor the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and that would have no place in the trading relationship with the West because they will violate several laws. So you can see, in the end, pure economic engagement with China can never be separated from political and religious issues. In the end, it's really about Cold War II, right? It's about communist system versus Western democracy. I would also like to point out that religious freedom, human rights, issues like this should never take second place in bilateral relationship with China. In the past, we have this kind of reports. Last week, for example, we not only have the religious report, we also have the human trafficking report. China also ranked very high, one of the worst violators of human trafficking. Those issues are fundamental, not only to the values of our country, but also to how the future of the world will look like.
Yeah.
If we don't tackle this as the first and primary issues of the day, and our relationship can never move forward. We cannot just address issues that China wants us to address, the transactional issues of trade, of tariffs. Those are important. But most importantly, on top of that, we should always place religion, human rights, and political freedom at the top. And the United States is the strongest in those. China is the weakest over there. We have to use our strength fighting against China's weakness.